Welcome back to On the Entrepreneur's Journey, the show where we explore how founders and build companies that scale, evolve, and ultimately run without them, creating freedom, growth, and lasting enterprise value. Today, I'm joined by Mario Smith, president of Waters Construction, one of Connecticut's top infrastructure builders. Over the past few years, Mario has done the best job I've seen in mapping out his transition, scaling revenues by more than 2.5 times, doubling his workforce, and building a professional leadership team to carry the company forward. What's most impressive is how the very process of designing his succession plan became a catalyst for growth, creating clarity, accountability, and momentum across the company. We'll talk about how he approached the transition the right way by building structure, developing people, and implementing a business system to make it all work. And along the way, we'll explore what every founder in the final stages of their career can learn from his blueprint for a successful handoff. So welcome to the show, Mario.
Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored that you want to interview me.
Well, I certainly do, and let's dive right in. So as I said in the intro, Waters has grown very rapidly in the last few years. And what made that possible beyond, obviously the strong market for infrastructure? What made that possible for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I get that question a lot lately. As a matter of fact, I was meeting our insurance agent today, going over our insurance renewal, and he asked me that again. Obviously, there is there's some truth to the fact that there's more money out there for infrastructure work, right? So most people are aware that a couple of years ago we passed an infrastructure bill, and so there is more work for what we do, right? But that is fundamentally not the reason why we've grown so much and at this point so successfully, because in construction it's not hard to grow. All you have to do is bid work at a very low price and you can get work, right? But if you grow too quickly with that strategy, you just get crushed, right? So really the reason why we were able to scale the way we did is different than just the market expanding. We talked about it, and I have a few reasons why I think that this worked, right? So first of all, a strong management team with the ability to make quick, good decisions was key to be able to expand the way we did. We also really worked on improving communications throughout the company, because as you scale and more people come into the business and more decisions need to be made, communication becomes, or poor communication becomes, a huge limiting factor to being able to succeed on a project. We also spent a lot of time focusing on the company's values. So in our case, our value system, which is by which we measure the expected behavior of people within our organization, is to be safe, smart, positive, respectful, and adaptable. So driving that message, I think, really helped focus our managers on the way we were going to interact with each other, interact with the rest of the world, and I think that made managing projects easier. And then there had to be a commitment on the part of the owners. This is a business that requires a lot of cash. So there had to be a commitment on the part of the owners, me being the main owner, to maintain a good cash position to be able to finance all of this growth. We didn't do it through debt. We did it all internally. And then systematizing how we hire people to make sure, there's a lot of complaints within the construction industry that, oh, there are not enough tradespeople, we could take more work, but we can't hire, we can't find qualified people. So putting a big effort into hiring and systematizing that hiring allowed us to make sure that we had the workforce to be able to complete the work profitably as we grew. So I would say those are really the main points that why we were able to scale the way we did in the last few years.
Yeah, and you really answered some of the questions that I was going to ask, but the one that stuck out to me, and it probably goes right to the next one, which is, um, the company wasn't always run that way, and I think you attributed it somewhat to what happened when COVID ran around, that the company was really an autocratic company where everything kind of pyramided up and to your decision making, and you really had you had mentioned that you had a flat sort of growth for the prior 2 or 3 years going into COVID, and you realized that you were really a bottleneck, and so this structure actually freed up your ability to grow. So you mentioned 2020 was a turning point for you, at least in our conversations, and you realized it was time to form a succession plan. So what triggered that moment for you?
Oh, I think it was a confluence of many things, right? And actually, you mentioned that we had sort of flatlined for 2 or 3 years. I would say it's more like 5 to 7 years, right? We were
Okay.
bumping along. Basically, we had maxed out our ability to successfully complete work, right? With the structure that we had, which was, as you mentioned, I made most of the major decisions, right? So, why 2020? Well, it, many things happen. Obviously, the pandemic happened, right? And so all of our systems were upended. We had to figure out how to work remotely. But I think just as importantly, at that time, I turned 58. My father was in his 80s. I started to see that the company had flatlined, right? And I think most importantly, I realize, watching my father deteriorate with age, and I don't know if it was a pandemic, but I just started to realize that my time was limited, and that I had to recognize my own mortality. And so, for whatever reason, at that point, I realized that it was going to be imperative to come up with a way of transitioning the company, or just accept that the company, like many of my competitors that I've seen over the years, would just slowly begin to wither until eventually it would close its doors. And that's just not something that I wanted. And so it all, it all sort of came to me in 2020.
Okay. So the pandemic sort of put in stark relief with your father's, aging, that mortality was an issue and you wanted to get ahead of it. So okay, so you decided that you needed to professionalize the company, professionalize the management team, both for the success of perpetuating the company as well as for growth. So once you committed to doing that, how did you decide what roles you were gonna give up and who was gonna take them, and how did that all happen?
Well, I think I mentioned to you. So I had been running the company since I was 29 years old.
Yeah.
One day, my father came in and said, "Here, you run the company," and he literally walked out the door and never came back. So I'd been doing it for a long time, and I think I'd gotten pretty good at managing an organization of a particular size, right? But I was completely limited by only knowing what I knew, right? Everything I did was based on my own experience, and I realized that I had no experience in doing a transition because there was no transition between my father and I. As I said, one
Well,
day he said, "Here, you run the company." The next day he was gone. There
yeah,
was no there was no plan, zero plan, right?
that's the old school transition.
Yes, I guess maybe that's. I think that was an extreme example of old school. I don't know,
Yeah.
but anyways, not a model that I wanted to follow, right?
Right,
So
right.
I realized that there was a lot that I didn't know, right? So I first had to sort of like eat some humble pie and realize, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, and I need some help. And so I started out. The first thing that I did is I hired a company called FMI, and they're like a big consultant in the construction space, right? And so, when I contacted them, it was clear that they had seen this problem many times before, and they said, "Yeah, we can help you with it." And so they did their thing, and part of it was to go and do an assessment of the company, and they did a big survey, and so they came back with their findings, and they designed like a 5-year plan for a transition, and it was all super basic, right?
Hmm.
Um, it was good. It got me going, right? But then I realized I needed a lot more. I didn't want to stick with them, so I ran into this other consultancy that runs peer groups, and these are industry-wide peer groups. So that was enormously impactful for me.
Hmm.
It allowed me to participate in these bi-yearly, we meet twice a year meetings or 3-day meetings, and there's 10 companies, and the other 9 companies are all heavy civil contractors. And um, every meeting we meet at a contractor's headquarters, and we spend 3 days and we dissect the company. And interestingly enough, like the biggest problem for, I would say, 8 out of the 10 companies there were transitions. And so it's perfect for me because all of a sudden, like, I'm now exposed to all these companies that are saying we have transition problems. And so that really opened my eyes as to what that means and what other companies, right, were doing. So super, super helpful. I did that for a couple of years. While that was happening, I started to realize, okay, I need to start building a team, uh, which I did. At first, it was from people that uh, already were working at Waters, and so we started as an executive team, and I began by opening up the books, and which fortunately for me at that point, my father was. Not involved in the company. His own health started to fail. He was not involved in the company at all, and that sort of gave me the freedom to do things a little bit more the way I went. He would have been horrified if he knew that. Again,
Yeah.
you mentioned old school, and that was the old school way. You didn't tell the rest of the company. You didn't share the financials, but I started by sharing the financials, which I think was an eye opener for them, and I started by meeting once a week and coming up with sharing problems with the executive team, to start to make decisions as a group rather than just being the fountainhead of all decisions, which is what by the way, I'll back up. At one point, I think when I started this, I think I had 15 direct reports. And that was just the direct reports because everybody else was like an indirect report to me, right?
Right, right.
So I consciously started to work on a structure where I had fewer direct reports, right?
Hmm.
Um, I did that for a while, and then I realized that, okay, we now need more structure. I got to figure out a way of getting these managers trained, have some structure on how decisions are made versus just ask Mario for the answer, right? And
Right.
so after about a year and a half of being in the first peer group, I joined a Vistage group. And for those who don't know Vistage is another peer group where you have diverse companies in the peer group. So I sort of got to see how other industries worked, right? But through the peer group, I started to meet a bunch of other consultants, and I started to hear about enterprise operating systems, right? And so I realized, okay, what we need is an enterprise operating system. And once I made that decision, and I started to explain it to the management team that I had in place at that time, uh, everybody got sort of bought in on it, and so we searched for consultants, and eventually hired you, Peter. I don't know if you remember being interviewed by us,
Yeah.
but I
Ew.
think the important part was that when we interviewed, we were ready. We were, we had already been meeting for about a year, but we were ready to have a structure in place. And so that's how that came about. And then, obviously since then, and you've been part of our story, we've been working on implementing that structure, and in particular the Pinnacle system.
So I'm curious about this part of it because one of the things that I find, especially when I go into a company for the first time, is that the ownership or the founder, that especially one that's been really making all the decisions like you had, the ability to let go and to empower people to make decisions is one of the most difficult things. It's just so hard to let go. And how did you navigate that? Because I'm sure it was counter to what your father had taught you and the way the company had been run always. How did you get comfortable allowing your leadership team to make those decisions, which you had been making for 30 years?
Um, well, I think to the root of it is, go back to 2020, right?
Right.
I had come to the conclusion that it was an absolute necessity, right? So I knew that it would be difficult. It might be difficult emotionally. I might have to accept certain things, but that time was not in my favor, right? And so the sooner I could get this done, and done well, the better. And so to me, it was just like a logical thing to do, right? And at that point, it just became an issue of like, how do I do it, and how do I do it successfully? It was never an issue of should I do it or not do it. Does that answer your question? Is that, yeah?
Yeah, no, it does. And so part of it is the other part of it is, of course, you have to trust the people. Um, and and so, the letting go means that the person on the other end can make those decisions in ways that you support and reach the outcomes that you like. And so, kudos to you for creating the team there where you had some people that were able to make those decisions too. I mean, that's the other side is one thing to make that decision to delegate to somebody, but it's also finding the right person and then having that trust to be able to know that they're going to make that right decision. And that is another thing that's the other half of the equation, really.
Yeah, I would say there's actually one more dimension to that, right? So it's easy to say, okay, I'm going to delegate, right? Okay,
Right.
emotionally, I'm ready to delegate. I'm going to let somebody else do it, right? And I think you can also say, oh, well, I know John Doe and I trust him. Well, again, having trust, super important, right? But you can't set somebody up for failure. So there has to be a system, a method, or a way to not only delegate to the manager, but to have the, well, certainty is probably a big word, but to have a degree of confidence that that manager has been trained and has been given the management tools to make a successful decision. Like, so to just say, here, I delegate to you, here, I trust you, go do it, right? That's not sufficient. You also have to, okay, I'm going to be delegating to you, so therefore I'm going to make sure that you're trained up enough so that you have the ability and have the tools to make the right decision, right?
Right.
And then the other thing is there's a whole thing about trust but verify. I do delegate a lot, but I do think it for now, it's still my job to verify as the leader of the company to make sure that things are getting done, and doing it without, being obnoxious or being micromanaging.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I,
So,
so that's how I've done it. Yeah.
right. And so, this sort of delves into the operating system side of things where, there's a process where, you go through that. How did the Pinnacle system in this case help you with the delegation, the training up of the managers, getting the right people in the right seats? Was that part of did that accelerate the process of creating a great management team that you did create?
Yeah, I don't know if it accelerated it. I think in some cases, you could say that maybe even slowed it down a little bit, versus just saying, here, you go run it kind of thing,
Right,
right?
right,
What it did do is it gave me a great degree of confidence that the outcomes, right, would be a hell of a lot better, or, we would be managing, a lot of construction is about managing risk, right?
right,
And so that the risk would be managed well by having the Pinnacle system. So, without going through all the various steps of the Pinnacle system, one of them being putting the right people in the right seats, right? So that was very helpful, right? Determining the weaknesses and strengths of everybody to sort of map out what kind of training needs to be done, and what is appropriately delegated. That was also very, very helpful. Again, I don't think it accelerated it. I think it gave me a greater degree of confidence that we would be able to achieve the outcome that we did, and we did. I mean, obviously the success that we've had in the last couple of years speaks volume about how successful we were and then the other thing that you start finding once you do delegate, and the people are trained up well, is that not infrequently, right, another manager will actually do a better job at it than you, right? Because now you're adding a bunch of new ideas, and so if you have 4 or 5 people tackling a problem versus one, right, a lot more can be done in an organization, and done in a way where you don't have a bunch of people running around with their hair on fire.
right, right. And the velocity of the decision making is quicker,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
and that allows for that growth to occur. And as you said, we went from a flat company to with obviously some market help, but your ability to do the work expanded such that you were able to to more than double your output.
Yes, absolutely. Mhm.
So the other part that we haven't really touched on yet, which I also compliment you on, is you really laid out, and I'd love you to share it with the audience here, a real galvanizing vision for the company. And I think it really attracted and motivated your team and others to come into the company because you really laid out a great vision. And I'd love you to share, your vision for the next, 3 to 5 years, as you have with your team.
Sure. I mean, quite a while ago, I did, and by quite a while ago, I'd say maybe even 15, 20 years ago, at a certain point, I did observe that organizations have certain directions, right? They're never static, right? You're either moving in a positive direction or you're moving in a negative direction.
Mm.
But no matter what, you have direction, right?
Right,
And that people, particularly younger people or people in early in their careers, right, want to work for a company that has a direction, right, and that direction somehow um, helps them in their career. So anyway, so that was quite a while ago, but that was just all of those ideas just sort of lived in my head, and I didn't. I would communicate it, but not in a systematic way, right? And so lately, so I read a book, and I don't know if whatever, it might have been you suggested it or Vistage, or at some point or another, I ran into this book called Vivid Vision.
By Kim and Harold, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And it's a short read, and it was very enlightening. Again, none of the ideas in the Vivid Vision were to me foreign, right? But it was very nice to have him explain it sort of as a system. You know, this is how you put your vision together, and this is how you communicate it, and this is what it's going to do for your organization, right? And so this has been actually rather recent. Um, um, the first time I sort of experimented to bringing my vision to the company beyond just the managers was at our annual Christmas party in 2024. So that was the first time where I stood up in front of the whole company and said, this is where we're going to be 3 years from now. And it was really well received. I mean, people talked about it on and off, mentioned it to me probably throughout this year, right? Um, and for the consumption of the whole company, I sort of scaled it down to just a few points. But I think it just gave everybody in the room an idea that yeah, we're going places, right? The company has direction, and I want to either jump on this train or stay on this train, right? So, a few bullet points. So, and I'm going to refer to this all to like end of 2028, right? Because that's 3 years from now, right?
Right,
So,
right.
so in my vision, by the end of 2028, Waters is a $130 million a year company. That's I sort of picked the number out of thin air, but it doesn't matter, right? So it gives. I mean, it's not completely out of thin air, but it gives people a target to shoot for. A
Right,
bit of a not a moonshot, but a stretch, right?
right.
By the end of 2028, the management team is running a company. That I basically told everybody 2028 I'm retiring, right? So I put an end date to that, and so everybody's working towards okay, Mario's leaving at the end of 2028. At the end of 2028, every top manager has identified their second in command. So we de-risk the company if the proverbial red bus, hits one of our managers, not just me. Like, most company focus on, oh, you got to have a plan in case the president gets hit by a bus, right? Or the owner gets hit by a bus. But it start to realize that, what about all these, now that the company is being run by these managers, what if they get hit by a bus, right? So having building up a bench of managers, that's by 2028, we want to have all the positions backstopped. We want our revenue stream to be more diverse, right? So we are within what we do, we're fairly diverse, but we want to be able to operate in different states. By 2028, I put a goal of us operating in 3 different states. Right now, we're operating in Connecticut and a little bit in New York. So that's one of the goals. And I want our heavy civil division to diversify into other aspects of construction. Very important. We want to eliminate divisional divides, right? We want to completely get rid of the us versus them, which is still a little bit internal to our company. Oh, I work for the equipment division, or I work for the paving division, and so I want to get to a point where everybody in the company views it as a we. We don't use us. We don't use them as a pronoun. I want to professionalize how we manage our equipment. Right now, the decisions are sort of ad hoc. We want to really understand how, because it's our heavy equipment is a very big investment. And so we want to make sure that we're making good decisions based on the whole life cycle of the equipment. We want the company to be fully systematized. We just started this year, which is part of the Pinnacle system, but we really want to double down on our policies and procedures and have a system for everything that we do. And then the other target that we said is we want to increase the efficiency of the company. And so I put another metric out there, and we want to make sure that we hit $900,000 of revenue per employee. So those are the big oh, and then finally we want to change governance, and by 2028 we want to have a fully functional board of directors of 5 that will help the future president to run this company.
Mhm. And I applaud so many of the things that you're doing, because all the things that you mention, as you say, de-risk the company, and they also grow the enterprise value of the company, because you eliminate the single person dependencies, the single customer dependencies. With the Connecticut DOT being such a huge part of your business, you start to mitigate that risk. You start to make the company self-managing, and all the customer vendor relationships, you diversify those, and you really have created a company that not only can grow, but also is de-risked on the downside. So if something does happen where you're future-proofing your business in case one of your suppliers goes out of business, or Connecticut slows down dramatically, or one of your best people leaves, you've created redundancy across all those areas. So it's very, it works both in the upside as well as the downside. And I think that's very astute of you. And it also gets you to greener pastures quicker, which is, I know, an objective of you, having run the company for so long. So all great stuff, Mario. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, the company, they want to learn more, maybe want to come work there, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you and the company?
Are you saying me personally, or
Or-
Waters?
Yeah, both actually.
Well, probably the easiest thing is just look us up on our website. We have a bunch of information on the company. We have our contact us, and so yeah. So if you just Google Waters Construction or Waters, we're ranked fairly high on Google, and so that'd probably be the easiest way of reaching me. Yeah, absolutely.
And then the last question I have is, so take somebody in the audience who is in the later stages of their career, like you are, and they haven't, stepped back at all. What would be the first step, that I know you've gone through a ton of them, but what would you say to that person about starting this process of transition?
I think it's very important. The very first step, right, is realize your own mortality. Understand that time for the business owner is a one resource that you are 100% sure will go down to 0.
Yeah.
So, and really, I mean, I don't say that tongue in cheek. Like, once I made that realization, everything else flowed from there, because then everything else becomes a necessity. Like, you realize that, okay, this is what I need to do next. It might take me 3 months, it might take me 6 months, it might take me a year, but this is the next step that I have to do. And I've seen it happen. Like, if you're not 100% in the idea, if you don't completely, if you have any doubt that you will have a day where you will not be able to run this company anymore, then you'll always be saying, well, I can postpone it. I can do it another time, or yeah, I'll hang in there for a little bit longer, right? It just won't be a priority. The
Right.
moment you really realize, and it almost, depending on your age, right, it almost becomes like your number one priority. Like, you realize, okay, that's it. Like, this is what I have to do. Like, there's other things that I need to do to run the company, but this is going to become my focus. And so I would say that's the first step.
Right. Right.
And then after that, find people that can help you do it.
Right.
Because that was also important. Yeah.
Right. Just the humility of realizing that you have a finite time on Earth, and that changes your perspective. I love that. So, well, that's great. Well, Mario, thank you very much for your time today, and thank you to the audience for being with us today on the Entrepreneur's Journey. And until next time, we will see you later. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Peter. Thanks for having me, and I hope I can be helpful to somebody who's in my same position.
Thank you.
Take care, Peter.